At 4:37 a.m. on June 17, 1944, the Normandy dawn was little more than a pale suggestion behind a wall of drifting mist. The hedgerows were slick with dew, the air thick with the scent of earth and cordite. Somewhere in the gray, a German patrol moved cautiously, boots squelching in the mud, rifles at the ready. But they were not alone. 30 yards away, crouched in the shadow of a shattered apple tree, was Lieutenant Arthur Mad Jack Churchill, longbow in hand, eyes narrowed, every muscle coiled with anticipation. His comrades had laughed when he'd unpacked the bow from his kit. "What are you going to do, Jack, hunt rabbits?" One had jeered. Another, shaking his head, muttered, "This is a war, not a medieval fair." Even the sergeant, a veteran of Dunkirk, had pulled him aside and whispered, "You'll get yourself killed with that thing." But Churchill had only smiled, stringing the bow with practiced hands, the same way his ancestors had done for centuries. He'd heard it all before, every joke, every doubt, every warning that a wooden bow was no match for German steel. Now, as the patrol drew closer, Churchill's heart hammered in his chest, not with fear, but with the electric thrill of the hunt. He could see the outlines of the enemy through the mist, the glint of a sergeant's insignia, the nervous flicker of a cigarette. He drew an arrow from his quiver, knocked it silently, and pulled the string to his cheek. The world shrank to the space between his eye and the target, to the tension in the bow, to the moment before history would be made. What happened next would leave both friend and foe speechless. In the next 3 days, the man they'd mocked for his medieval weapon would turn the hedgerows of Normandy into a sniper's graveyard, and the legend of the longbow would be reborn in the age of machine guns. If you think you know how this story ends, think again. The first arrow was about to fly. To understand the audacity of the longbow in the Second World War, you have to step back into the chaos of Europe in 1944. The continent was a patchwork of ruined cities, cratered fields, and hedgerows that had both friend and foe. The Allied invasion of Normandy had begun just days before, and every mile gained was paid for in blood. British commandos, like the men of No. 2 Commando, were the tip of the spear, trained for sabotage, ambush, and the kind of close-quarters fighting that left little room for error or mercy. Modern warfare was defined by its machines. The standard-issue Lee-Enfield rifle, with its 10-round magazine and quick-bolt action, was a marvel of British engineering. The Sten gun, compact and deadly at close range, spat out 9mm rounds in a staccato burst. The Bren gun, heavy and reliable, laid down suppressive fire that could pin an enemy squad in place. Across the lines, the Germans answered with their own arsenal. The Mauser Kar 98K, the MP-40 submachine gun, the MG-42, nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw for its terrifying rate of fire. In this world of steel and smoke, the idea of bringing a longbow to battle seemed not just eccentric, but suicidal. Yet for Arthur Mad Jack Churchill, the bow was more than a relic. It was a weapon of silence and surprise, a tool that required skill, patience, and nerve. Where bullets announced their presence with every shot, an arrow whispered through the air, unseen until it struck. In the hand of a master, the longbow could kill as surely as any rifle, and leave the enemy guessing where death had come from. Churchill's choice was a study in contrast. While his comrades trusted in the rapid fire of their Stens and Brents, he relied on the ancient rhythm of draw, aim, and release. He carried a Scottish broadsword at his hip, a set of bagpipes in his pack, and a quiver of arrows slung across his back. To many, he was a curiosity, a throwback to another age. But in the brutal close-in fighting of Normandy's hedgerows, where every shot could give away your position, and every second counted, Churchill's medieval weapon would prove to be the most modern tool of all. The stage was set for a story no one expected. A lone archer, stalking the most dangerous men in the German army, with nothing but wood, string, and centuries of forgotten skill. Arthur Mad Jack Churchill was a man out of time, born in Hong Kong to a British colonial family. He grew up with a restless spirit and a taste for the unconventional. As a boy, he learned to shoot a bow before he ever fired a rifle, spending hours in the English countryside perfecting his aim. By his 20s, he was a championship archer, a bagpiper, and a motorcycle enthusiast, a man who seemed to collect skills from every era. When war broke out, Churchill volunteered for the commandos, drawn to the promise of danger and the chance to fight on his own terms. From the start, Churchill stood apart. He wore a Scottish broadsword at his hip, played the bagpipes before battle, and insisted on carrying his longbow into combat. His men called him Mad Jack, with a mix of affection and exasperation. Some thought he was a genius, others a lunatic. The officers tolerated his quirks because he got results. His raids were daring, his ambushes precise, and his courage infectious. But even among the commandos, where eccentricity was almost a badge of honor, Churchill's devotion to the bow was a step too far. In the barracks, the jokes never stopped. "Careful, Jack, you'll poke someone's eye out with that thing. Maybe you can win the war with arrows and bagpipes." The new recruits watched him with wide eyes, unsure whether to laugh or salute. The veterans, hardened by years of fighting, shook their heads and muttered that one day Churchill's luck would run out. But Churchill never wavered. He cleaned his bow with the same care others gave their rifles, checked his arrows for straightness, and practiced in the early morning mist while the rest of the unit slept. Beneath the bravado, though, was a man who felt the weight of every doubt. Churchill knew what his comrades whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. He understood the risk of being different in a world that demanded conformity. But he also knew the power of surprise, the value of silence, and the satisfaction of proving the skeptics wrong. For Churchill, the bow was more than a weapon. It was a statement, a challenge to the very idea of what a soldier could be. As the German patrols grew bolder and the fighting more desperate, Churchill's resolve only hardened. He was determined to show that sometimes the oldest tools could be the most deadly, and that the man everyone doubted might just be the one to change the course of the battle. The hedgerows of Normandy were a nightmare for Allied soldiers. Every field was a fortress, every lane a potential ambush. The Germans, masters of defense, had turned the countryside into a deadly maze, and at the heart of their resistance were the sergeants, battle-hardened NCOs who led from the front, rallied broken squads, and turned every setback into a new line of fire. These men were the backbone of the Wehrmacht's counterattacks, and their presence on the battlefield could turn a minor skirmish into a bloodbath. For the British commandos, the challenge was clear: break the German lines, silence the sergeants, and keep moving before the enemy could regroup. But the reality was far more complicated. The Germans knew the terrain, moved unseen to bocage, and struck with ruthless precision. Every time the commandos advanced, they were met with a hail of machine gun fire, mortars, and the sudden, barking orders of a sergeant rallying his men. The cost was measured in bodies and time, two things the Allies could not afford to lose. Conventional weapons, for all their firepower, had their limits in this environment. The Lee-Enfield rifle was accurate, but its report echoed to the hedgerows, giving away the shooter's position. The Sten gun was deadly at close range, but its spray of bullets was as likely to hit a hedge as a German. The Bren gun could pin down an enemy squad, but its weight and bulk made it hard to maneuver in the tangled fields. Every shot risked drawing return fire, every burst of noise a beacon for German mortars. In this world of steel and smoke, Churchill's longbow seemed like a relic, a liability rather than an asset. The bow required time to draw, a steady hand, and a clear line of sight. It could not match the rate of fire of a machine gun, nor the range of a rifle. To most, it was a curiosity at best, a death sentence at worst. The manuals made no mention of archery. The doctrine was clear: silence the enemy with overwhelming firepower, keep your head down, and trust in the tools of modern war. But the problem was deeper than weapons. The Germans had learned to expect the sound of gunfire, to react instantly to the crack of a rifle or the chatter of a Sten. They moved in short bursts, never exposing themselves for long, always ready to return fire. The sergeants, in particular, were experts at reading the battlefield, spotting the muzzle flash, calling for smoke, shifting their squads before the next volley. Killing them was the key to breaking the German defense, but finding them and surviving long enough to take the shot was almost impossible. Churchill's bow, for all its limitations, offered something the others could not: silence. An arrow loose from the shadows made no sound, left no flash, and struck without warning. But to use it, Churchill had to get close, closer than any doctrine would allow, closer than any sane man would dare. He had to move unseen, pick his targets, and trust that centuries-old skill could outwit modern tactics. The risk was enormous. If he missed, if he was spotted, if the Germans realized what he was doing, he would be cut down in seconds. The bow was slow, unforgiving, and demanded perfection. The commandos doubted. The officers worried, and the Germans, if they ever found out, would show no mercy. Standard doctrine said survival was impossible. But Churchill was not interested in doctrine. He was interested in results, and in the hedgerows of Normandy. He was about to prove that sometimes the most unlikely weapon could be the deadliest of all. The first time Churchill tried to use his bow in the chaos of Normandy, the war seemed to conspire against him. The hedgerows were thick with fog and fear, every shadow a possible enemy. His unit had been ordered to clear a crossroads where German resistance was rumored to be light. But as they crept forward, the sharp crack of a Mauser shattered the silence. Bullets snapped through the leaves, and the commandos dove for cover, hearts pounding. Churchill pressed himself into the earth, feeling the damp seep through his uniform. He could hear the sergeant's voice, steady, commanding, rallying the Germans from behind a tangle of brambles. The rest of the squad returned fire, the staccato bursts of Stens and Brents echoing through the fields. But every shot seemed to draw more attention, more return fire, more danger. The Germans were dug in invisible, and the British were pinned. It was then that Churchill decided to act. He crawled through the mud, bow in hand, moving with the silent patience of a hunter. He found a gap in a hedge, just wide enough to see the outline of a German helmet. He knocked an arrow, drew the string, and aimed for the shadowy figure giving orders. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath slow and steady. He released. The arrow vanished into the mist and missed. It thudded harmlessly into a tree, the shaft quivering in the bark. The German sergeant never noticed, but one of Churchill's own men did. "Nice shot, Robin Hood," the commando whispered, half mocking, half afraid. Another shook his head, muttering, "We need bullets, not fairy tales." The tension in the squad was palpable. Every second spent waiting was another second the Germans could regroup, another chance for a mortar round to find its mark. Undeterred, Churchill tried again. He shifted position, crawling closer, ignoring the brambles that tore at his sleeves. This time, he waited for the sergeant to step into a patch of light. He drew, aimed, and fired. The arrow flew true, but at the last moment, the German ducked, and the arrow sailed over his head. The commando next to Churchill cursed under his breath. "We're going to die out here," he hissed. "Put that thing away before you get us all killed." The setback stung. Churchill felt the weight of every skeptical glance, every whispered doubt. He knew the risks, knew that every failed shot was another mark against him, another reason for his comrades to lose faith. The bow, so reliable in practice, seemed clumsy and slow in the chaos of real combat. The Germans were too quick, too cautious, too well trained to give him a clear shot. As the firefight dragged on, desperation crept in. Ammunition was running low, and the squad's nerves were fraying. The Germans, sensing weakness, began to probe the flanks, their sergeants barking orders in clipped, confident German. Churchill's squad leader shot him a look, equal parts frustration and fear. "We need results, Jack, not heroics." Churchill nodded, swallowing his pride. He wiped the mud from his hands, checked his arrows, and forced himself to focus. He knew he was running out of chances. The bow was no longer just a curiosity. It was his last hope to prove himself, to break the deadlock, to show that sometimes the old ways still had a place in the modern world. The tension in the hedgerows was electric. Every man was waiting for a miracle or a disaster. And as Churchill readied his next arrow, he knew that the next shot might decide not just his fate, but the fate of his entire squad. The third day in the hedgerows dawned with a heavy, breathless silence. The squad was exhausted, nerves frayed by sleepless nights and the constant threat of German counterattacks. Ammunition was running low, and every man felt the weight of desperation. The jokes about Churchill's bow had faded, replaced by a grim, unspoken anxiety. The medieval weapon was now just another oddity in a world where nothing seemed to work. But as the sun burned away the morning mist, the Germans struck again. This time, it was a textbook ambush, machine guns opening up from a hidden position, mortars thumping in the distance, and a sergeant's voice barking orders that sent the enemy squad surging forward. The commandos hit the dirt, pinned by a storm of bullets. The squad leader hissed, "We need to take out that sergeant or we're finished." Churchill's heart pounded. He crawled through the mud, bow in hand, moving with the silent patience that had once made him a champion archer. He found a gap in a hedge, just wide enough to see the German sergeant, standing tall, pistol raised, rallying his men. The rest of the squad was too far away, their rifles useless against the entrenched enemy. Churchill's hands shook, not with fear, but with the electric thrill of possibility. Everyone said it was a joke. Everyone believed the bow was a relic, a fantasy, a waste of time. But in that moment, Churchill saw what they couldn't. The sergeant was exposed, confident in the chaos, certain that no one could reach him without giving away their position. Churchill knocked an arrow, drew the string, and let it fly. The arrow whispered through the air, invisible and silent. It struck the sergeant in the chest, dropping him instantly. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. The Germans stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had happened. The commandos, too, were stunned. There was no gunshot, no flash, just a man who had been alive one moment and gone the next. The psychological impact was immediate. The German squad faltered, their attack losing momentum. The commandos seized a moment, surging forward and overrunning the position. When they reached the fallen sergeant, they found the arrow still lodged in his uniform, a medieval signature in a modern war. Word spread quickly. The men who had doubted Churchill now watched him with a new respect, a mix of awe and unease. The bow was no longer a joke. It was a weapon of terror, a ghost in the hedgerows. The Germans, too, began to whisper about the English archer who killed without a sound. Patrols grew more cautious. Sergeants ducked for cover, and the enemy's confidence began to crack. Churchill understood the power of surprise. He used the bow again and again, each time striking from the shadows, each time leaving the enemy guessing. He moved like a phantom, never firing from the same place twice, never giving the Germans a chance to adapt. The silence of the bow became his greatest ally. No muzzle flash, no echo, just a sudden, inexplicable fall of another leader. The squad's attitude shifted. The same men who had mocked him now covered his flanks, watched his back, and waited for his signal. The bow was no longer a curiosity. It was the key to their survival. The squad leader, once skeptical, now relied on Churchill's instincts, sending him ahead to scout and strike. The commandos began to win, one silent arrow at a time. FOMO trigger. What happened next would change everything. In the next 48 hours, Churchill would use his bow to eliminate 6 more German sergeants, turn the tide of the battle, and leaving both friend and foe speechless. The legend of the medieval weapon was just beginning, and the world would soon learn that sometimes the oldest tools are the most deadly. If you think you know how this story ends, think again. The most shocking moments were still to come. The hedgerows of Normandy became a hunting ground, and for 3 days, Arthur Mad Jack Churchill was a ghost that haunted every German patrol. The first arrow had shattered the illusion of safety, but it was only the beginning. As the sun rose on the second day, the squad moved with a new sense of purpose, their eyes searching the mist for Churchill's signal. The jokes were gone, replaced by a tense anticipation. Every man knew that something extraordinary was unfolding in the fields around them. Churchill's tactics were a blend of ancient skill and modern cunning. He moved at dawn and dusk, using the low light to mask his approach. He studied the German patrols, learning their routines, watching for the telltale signs of a sergeant giving orders or pausing to check a map. He crawled through mud and nettles, his bow wrapped in burlap to muffle any sound, his arrows fletched with gray feathers to blend with the fog. He waited for hours, motionless, his breath slow and measured, until the perfect moment arrived. The second kill came at midday, as a German squad regrouped behind a stone wall. The sergeant, confident and loud, stood to rally his men. Churchill, hidden in a thicket 20 yards away, drew his bow and released. The arrow struck the sergeant in the throat, dropping him before he could shout a warning. The Germans panicked, firing wildly into the hedges, but Churchill was already gone, melting into the shadows. The commandos advanced, seizing the position with barely a shot fired. By the end of the first day, the squad had taken more ground than in the previous week. The men whispered about Churchill's bow, their skepticism replaced by awe. The sergeant who had once mocked him now watched his back, sending him ahead to scout and strike. The squad leader, a veteran of Dunkirk, pulled Churchill aside and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You're saving lives." The third kill was the most daring. Under cover of darkness, Churchill slipped behind enemy lines, guided only by the stars and the distant rumble of artillery. He found a German command post, marked by the glow of a lantern and the low murmur of voices. He waited, heart pounding, as a sergeant emerged to relieve himself. One silent arrow, and the man crumpled without a sound. Churchill retrieved the arrow, erasing any trace of his presence, and slipped away before the alarm was raised. The body count mounted. By the end of the second day, 4 German sergeants had fallen to Churchill's bow. The enemy was rattled. Patrols moved in larger groups. Sergeants kept their heads down, and the Germans began to suspect they were facing something more than just bullets. The psychological toll was immense. The Germans started firing at shadows, wasting ammunition, their discipline fraying with every silent kill. Churchill's comrades watched the transformation with a mix of pride and disbelief. The man they had once called Robin Hood was now their secret weapon. They covered his flanks, relayed his signals, and trusted his instincts. The bow, once a punchline, was now a symbol of hope, a reminder that ingenuity and courage could turn the tide, even in the darkest moments. The 5th and 6th kills came in quick succession. A German squad, pinned by machine gun fire, tried to break out under the cover of smoke. Churchill, perched in the branches of an old oak, picked off the sergeant as he led the charge. Minutes later, another sergeant fell as he tried to rally his men from behind a haystack. Each arrow was a message. Nowhere was safe, no leader untouchable. The final duel was the most intense. On the third day, the Germans launched a desperate counterattack, led by a sergeant known for his brutality. The fighting was fierce, grenades, bayonets, and close-quarters chaos. Churchill moved through the melee like a shadow, his bow silent amid the thunder of gunfire. He spotted the sergeant, pistol raised, urging his men forward. Churchill drew, aimed, and released. The arrow struck true, and the sergeant fell, his men scattering in confusion. The battle ended with the commandos holding the crossroads, the German attack broken. 7 sergeants had fallen to Churchill's bow in 3 days. The squad, once skeptical, now looked at him with a reverence usually reserved for legends. The bow was no longer a relic. It was a weapon of war, and Churchill was its master. As the sun set on the third day, the squad gathered around a small fire, their faces lit by the glow. The air was thick with exhaustion and relief. Churchill sat apart, cleaning his bow, the weight of the past days settling on his shoulders. He thought of the men he had killed, the risks he had taken, and the strange satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. The legend of the medieval bow spread quickly. Other units heard the stories, some dismissing them as fantasy, others desperate to learn Churchill's secrets. The Germans, too, whispered about the English archer who killed without a sound. In the hedgerows of Normandy, the rules of war had changed, and for 3 days a man with a bow had shown that sometimes the oldest weapons are the most deadly. The squad's respect was hard-won, but it was real. Churchill had turned ridicule into awe, doubt into belief. The bow, once mocked, was now a symbol of what was possible when courage, skill, and a refusal to accept the impossible came together in the crucible of war. And as the fire burned low, every man there knew they had witnessed something they would never forget. When the gunfire finally faded and the hedgerows fell silent, the transformation within Churchill's unit was unmistakable. The man they once called Robin Hood in jest was now the subject of hushed admiration. The bow, once dismissed as a relic, was passed from hand to hand, its polished wood and worn grip now a symbol of survival and ingenuity. Soldiers who had doubted Churchill now sought his advice, eager to learn the secrets of his silent weapon. The squad leader, who had once warned him to leave the games at home, now credited Churchill's arrows with saving lives and breaking the German counterattacks. Word of Churchill's exploits spread quickly through the ranks. Officers from other units came to see the battle, to hear the story firsthand. Some still shook their heads in disbelief, but most simply nodded in respect. The Germans, too, felt the impact. Patrols grew more cautious, sergeants kept their heads down, and rumors of the English archer began to circulate among enemy lines. The psychological effect was as real as any bullet. The bow itself survived the battle, its limbs scarred but unbroken. Churchill cleaned it with the same care he gave his rifle, knowing it had earned its place in the annals of war. What had begun as a joke, a curiosity, had become a legend, a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely weapon can change the course of a fight. In the aftermath, the men who had once laughed now understood. In the right hands, even a medieval bow could shape the outcome of modern war. Churchill's story is more than a tale of arrows and war. It's a testament to the power of thinking differently when it matters most. In a world obsessed with firepower and conformity, he dared to trust his own instincts, even when it meant standing alone. His courage to carry a bow into battle, to risk ridicule and failure, became the very thing that saved lives and turned the tide. It's a reminder that innovation isn't always about new technology. Sometimes it's about seeing old tools in a new light and having the nerve to use them when everyone else says you're wrong. For every veteran who's ever been told their idea wouldn't work, for every underdog who's faced laughter for daring to be different, Churchill's legacy is a beacon. It's proof that true heroism isn't just about bravery under fire, but about the quiet resolve to do what's right, even when the world is watching and waiting for you to fail. This story deserves to be remembered because it speaks to the heart of what makes history: the courage to stand apart, the will to adapt, and the belief that one person's vision can change the course of battle and maybe even the world. If this story inspired you, please like the video and subscribe for more true accounts of forgotten heroes and battlefield ingenuity from World War II. Share your thoughts or family stories in the comments. Your voice helps keep these memories alive for future generations. Don't let these incredible tales fade into history. Every story matters, and together we can make sure they're never lost. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next remarkable chapter of courage and innovation. There are more hidden stories waiting to be discovered, and you won't want to miss what comes next.